All right, let's talk about something we all just assume is true. If you want someone to perform better, you just offer them more money. Seems simple, right? But what if that's not the whole story? What if it's just plain wrong?
You'd think the answer is a no-brainer. Of course it does. But honestly, it's not that simple. This very question has been at the heart of a massive, decades-long tug-of-war between two different ways of looking at human behavior. So, in one corner, you've got the economists. For them, it's pretty straightforward. Money's a powerful lever. You pull it, performance goes up. But in the other corner, you have psychologists, and they've been waving a caution flag for years. They argue that sometimes dangling cash can actually do more harm than good. It can crowd out that inner fire, that simple joy of doing a good job, and turn something you love into just a transaction. So, who's right?
To get to the bottom of this, we're going to put on our detective hats. We're going to investigate a huge new piece of evidence, a massive meta-analysis that collected decades' worth of economic experiments, all to try and finally settle this debate.
And when I say massive, I really mean it. The researchers started by pulling together 88 different high-quality experiments. And from those 88 studies, they collected, get this, more than 2,000 individual performance estimates. We are talking about an absolute mountain of data. Now, the common wisdom out there, the kind of thing you'll read in business reports from places like McKinsey, is that money is a key driver. So with this mountain of data, you'd expect to see a really clear, strong connection between incentives and performance, wouldn't you? Well, here is our first big clue. After running all the numbers, the raw, uncorrected effect was 0.051. Now, that number is just a statistical way to measure the strength of the relationship. But here's the thing, and this is really important. In the world of research, any effect below 0.07 is considered negligible. It's so small, it's barely a whisper. But hold on, because the plot is about to thicken.
Yep, there's a huge plot twist coming. It turns out that even that teeny tiny number might be an exaggeration, all thanks to a sneaky problem that happens all the time in the world of science and publishing.
It's a thing called publication bias, and it's actually pretty easy to understand. Imagine a study finds a huge, shocking result. Well, that's exciting. It's going to get published. But what if another study finds that money had no effect at all? That's kind of boring, right? So that study often gets shoved in a file drawer and never sees the light of day. The result? It's like only ever hearing about the one person who won the lottery, but never the millions who bought a ticket and won nothing. It gives you a totally warped view of reality.
This is a perfect way to picture it. It really is like a funnel. The really big, juicy, positive results, they sail right on through and get published. The kind of interesting ones, they probably make it too. But the studies that found nothing, they get stuck, rejected. So the evidence we see is just a fraction of what's really out there. The big question is, what happens when you account for all that missing information?
All right, this is it. The most important part of the investigation. The researchers used some very clever statistical tools to essentially add back in all those studies that were probably sitting in a file drawer to see what the real picture looks like.
So just to remind ourselves where we started, before any of these corrections, we had that tiny, barely there effect.
That was the number, 0.051. A super small effect based only on the lottery winner studies that actually got published.
And now, for the grand reveal, the true effect, once we account for that hidden bias, it's basically zero. We're talking about an effect size so close to zero that you literally can't tell them apart statistically. Once you account for all the unpublished, boring studies where nothing happened, the entire effect just disappears. It vanishes into thin air. And this wasn't some kind of fluke. I mean, just look at this. They sliced the data every which way. Did it matter if it was in a controlled lab or out in the real world? Nope. What about a fun, appealing task versus a dull one? Still no. No matter how you look at it, after you correct for the bias, the effect is so small, it might as well not be there at all.
So, the big question is, why? If the data says paying more money has pretty much zero effect on performance across the board, what's actually going on?
Well, the researchers offered a few really interesting possibilities. One is the distraction effect. You get so focused on hitting the target to get the money that the actual quality of your work goes down. Another idea? Maybe a lot of the original studies just weren't that good. And a third, which is kind of funny, is that researchers love to study weird, edgy situations where incentives are likely to fail, not the normal, boring tasks where they might work just fine.
Now, does this all mean we should just get rid of bonuses and raises? No, absolutely not.
The real crucial takeaway from all this is that it's not about if you use incentives, it's all about how you design them. It's about being smarter.
So what does a smart incentive look like? Well, for one, framing is everything. Turns out we humans are way more motivated by the fear of losing something than we are by the chance of gaining it. Also, you have to be really careful with high stakes. For a complex task that needs brain power, throwing a huge pile of cash at it can actually make people choke under the pressure. And finally, you have to know when money just gets in the way. For creative work or anything driven by a sense of purpose, money can poison the well.
Which brings us to a final, really big question for all of us. Companies spend billions of dollars on financial incentives, all based on this assumption that they work. But if this massive body of evidence shows their average effect is basically zero, what are we missing? It forces us to ask a much deeper question. If it's not just about the money, then what really truly motivates us to do our best work?